Well, thank you. What an introduction, Fenella. I'm going to take my background off, bring up the slides, and I'm just going to change my size a little bit. So today, what I want to explore is this idea of being future ready. What happens when machines get more sophisticated, and what do we human beings need to do about that? So first of all, I just want to say thank you so much to Sean and the team. I was able to take the fee that they offered me today, and I've given it to this wonderful charity, My Mental Health Rocks. And these guys, they travel the country and they help to show children that mental health is something that's innate and can never be broken. It's a very progressive and future-looking way of looking at the human condition. Some of you may wonder what the hell a futurist is. Here's some examples of different types of projects that I've done with different types of clients. But today, I want to start along with you. So let's have a think a little bit about how humans have interacted with machines. And when I say machines, I'm not talking about steam engines, I'm talking about computers. So if we go back to the early 1980s, I'll just duck down here, we had typing in the form of MS-DOS. So MS-DOS was licensed by Microsoft to IBM, and those were the early personal computers. Fast forward to 1984, and we had the Apple Macintosh. Now, Apple, unfortunately, they stole the graphics user interface, Windows, that we've come to understand it as, but they did install it into their Apple Macintosh, and that really brought forward the Windows operating environment, which obviously went into personal computers as well, PCs. Now, they didn't invent the touch or the haptic interface that we see through our tablets and our phones, but they certainly innovated it, and they mainstreamed it in 2007 with the advent of the iPhone. And then in 2016, I would argue there was a bit of a convergence from some of these technologies that we understand as augmented reality. So those of you with children who maybe played Pokemon Go, or perhaps they got the early Oculus Quest headset from Facebook and were playing games like Beat Saber. This was a convergence of technologies, I think, that enabled what we now refer to as the spatial computing environment. And this is where we interact with machines in physical space. But being a futurist, I want to look a little bit further ahead, and I want to look at the birth or the evolution of so-called neural interfaces. So neural interfaces, like many of these high technologies, have their history going back a long while. So when we go back, we think about this, it was called the electroencephalograph, which just sat on a person's head, and it was used as a means of reading brainwaves, and it's used in everything from politics to marketing to, of course, medicine. But going forward, if we believe the likes of Elon Musk, we might start to see in about 2025, 2030, early talk of this neural interface or the wet interface. This is where actually electrodes are penetrating our brains and enabling direct communication with computers. Now, do I think it's going to evolve like that? No, not at all. I think what we'll start to see over the next 10 years is things like cochlear implants to help people to hear again, or bionic eyes to help blind people to see again. But these technologies, they can seem quite dystopian, and I think for quite good reason. So what I've done here is I've just created a short video for you to give you an idea of sort of what I think the impact of this technology could be. And it's really just to give you some new ideas. So if I just introduce the video, I'll fade myself out and we will play the video. All right, just stop that. So a few ideas there about sort of how I think these neural interfaces, the sorts of issues that they could well arise for us. So we can talk about this a lot longer. If anybody wants to contact me afterwards, I've got loads of material and lots to say about neural interfaces. But moving forward, we hear so much about the sorts of skills that we're likely to need as these machines get more sophisticated. And I think the underlying point that I want to make here is that we just need to get better at being human beings, because machines are just going to get better at being machines. So what I've done here is I've plotted a little graph along an X and a Y axis, and we've got our intuited skills and our learned skills across our X and Y axis. Now, none of these will probably seem particularly unusual to you. The broad pattern that I'm pointing out here, even though we could easily spend a day on each of these, the broad pattern is just that machines are going to do more of that brute force analysis that analysis that we have applied in order to get ourselves to the point here. So we need to get much better at being human. And I think something that's never really talked about in terms of skills, but I think is the underpinning skill that underpins all of these. I can tell you a little story here. So here we are. Anybody who's been to London, we've got people from all over Europe. This is Southampton Row. And in the 12th of September 1933, just to my right here is Leo Szilard. He was a Hungarian physicist. And as he's walking up Southampton Row on this day, he crosses the road and he notices a crack in that road. And from that crack, he intuits the nuclear chain reaction, which then went on to create atomic energy, atomic weapons. So it's that power, I would say, of something really, really powerfully human, which is our capacity for realization. That's our capacity to have fresh insight that comes into the moment. That could be, we've all had it before. We could be on the toilet, taking the dog out for a walk, in the bath, and suddenly that idea just comes to our mind. Now, the great thing about it is that it's available to anyone. The sad thing about it is that we can't technique it. We can't just bring it into existence. All we can do, I think, is to notice it. And the more that we notice it, the more these types of skills that I've highlighted will just come to the surface naturally. And if you're interested, I can't recommend highly enough Michael Neal's book, which is shown on screen here, The Inside Out Revolution. I think it's the ideas here, as science catches up with spirituality, I think we'll start to understand the human mind in entirely new ways, which will propel us forward. So being a futurist, I couldn't possibly not talk about AI and automation. Incidentally, I don't think that if the world ends because of robots, they're not going to look like this. It's going to be significantly more boring and benign than an army of killer robots. But I want to look at what does it actually look like apart from what we see with our algorithms and our robotic process automation that we see in our firms. What does it look like when we bring this into the physical world? So again, I've created a little video here. I just want to show you what automation actually looks like. Some of it is very conceptual and some of it isn't. So I'll just phase myself out for a moment, and I'll be interested to see what you think. So a few interesting concepts, I think, there. If I just switch back to my slides a moment. Now, I wanted to tell you a little story about something that happened to me in my professional life. So between 2004 and about 2011, my business partner and I had a fantastic business traveling the world, and we would set up these what we call blog centers for events. And the purpose was to expand reach for events. They could be government events, corporate events, all sorts of business events, non-governmental events, charity events. And it was a wonderful time. And so we would be writing up, making little videos, creating podcasts, all with the idea of expanding the reach and asking people to comment on proceedings and then feeding into that event. But imagine my surprise come 2017, the editor of one of my favorite tech blogs, Zach Sheward, this was the 19th of November 2017, he put a tweet out, and he said, I gave a speech in Shanghai on Thursday, and before I got off stage, Tencent, the e-commerce giant, had posted a not half bad article about it, written by an AI named Dreamwriter. Now, if you want to actually see this, you can get this link off of me. I'll happily give you the presentation later. And what the machine was able to do was to create a summary just based off of listening of what he was said. And it occurred to me, would this have been something that I should be threatened by? And of course not, because what machines are terrible at is asking questions. And this is what humans are brilliant at. So Google will give you a billion answers, but it can't ask a single quality question. So our capacity, our ability to infer insight, to create patterns and so on and so forth is one of those magical things that I think we need to hold on to and machines will struggle with for a long time to come. So if I had time, I would love to talk to you about sort of why certain jobs are disappearing, why other jobs are coming in. But I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on three forecasts, three jobs that I think will evolve because society has problems. And that's where jobs come from, is that society has problems. The first is we're going to hear so much, I think, going forward about climate smart economics or climate smart production, climate smart supply chain, so on and so forth. So I'm forecasting here that if global temperatures are rising, we're going to need a new class of job. We're going to need, in this case, a guy called a water harvester. And why is this? This is because, unfortunately, in some of the areas where water is needed most, those heightened temperatures will cause water to evaporate and possibly dump where it's not needed so much. So water harvesters, these are people who are working with machines to extract moisture from the atmosphere to create drinking water. So there's my first forecast. The second one relates to how humans are living longer. So in the 2016, the UK's Guardian newspaper published an article where they asserted that the first person to live to 1,000 had already been born. And trust me, there's enormous amounts of money going into the human longevity movement at the moment. Some forecasters are suggesting by 2040, not only will we be able to halt the aging process, but we will be able to reverse it. Now, I'm not advocating for that, but what I am advocating for is that many of us here could easily go on to live to 100 plus years old. Now, traditionally, that might have meant as we got older and our bodies started to fail and even our minds, we might end up in care homes. But what I think we can see going forward is the birth of the aging specialist. So this is a bit like a care, except what they're doing is they're showing older people how can you live longer and live well with different types of technology. So here's the second job that I'd like to forecast for you. And the third one is, some of you might have seen the announcement from Mark Zuckerberg, the birth of his so-called metaverse. Now, the metaverse, by the way, is nothing new, this idea of living in virtual worlds. I don't think it's going to turn out quite as he would like, which is using his Oculus Quest headsets. I think when these 3D worlds do emerge, they will look something much more like the Star Trek holodeck, these holographic projections. Anyway, there's an enormous amount I could say on this, but I'm going to create another forecast here, which is people will pay a premium for the human touch. They will continue to do so. So here, if I drop down, the metaverse concierge, right? So this is a human being you're paying a subscription fee to, and they will help you to get the most out of your experience through the metaverse, these 3D worlds or 3D world, depending on how that turns out. So we're now coming towards the end, and I want to just say a few things about how we might future ready ourselves going forward, right? So this is humans and machines working together. So many of you have probably come across the acronym VUCA, which was it was coined by, I think it was a military colonel in the early 1990s to describe the operating environment in which modern soldiers were operating. And it stood for volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity. And I find that a little bit of a negative way of looking at the world. I'd like to introduce a new world set of operating principles. And the first one is velocity, and that's our ability to enact change quickly for shifting circumstances. And we saw this in the UK, especially during the pandemic, with the NHS ability to be able to get large-scale hospitals up and running within 2 weeks. I think it's a great example. Unorthodoxy, so staying curious and ready to approach challenges in unusual ways. During the pandemic, I read a story about in Japan, car parks being reclassified for dating. So, people were coming along in their cars and they were meeting in a socially distanced way, and then carrying out dating activities, whatever you do in a car, I'm not exactly sure. Now, thirdly, collaboration. Thriving in the digital world has always arisen from sharing knowledge and forging relationships, and that's only going to become more important. And finally, something I think we can all relate to. If we'd gone from pre-lockdown to lockdown, I'm sure we all had to become more agile in how we run our organizations. That's our capacity to adapt a new mindset in order to think differently about a change. Isn't it incredible what happens when we drop our day-to-day thinking, is what I would say. So finally, I just want to look at a little bit about how we might future ready ourselves, a few hints and tips in the world of machines. So clearly, the pandemic has accelerated investment into these automation technologies, and that's all about building resilience in our organizations. I think we can expect much more sophisticated augmentation going forward. So watch for the rise of so-called digital dashboard jobs. And these are jobs that people will do in front of screens. And what's interesting about these jobs is once you understand the user interface, I think we'll see a lot more sideways movement between industries, because the machines will be doing so much of the heavy lifting in whatever domain that actually you won't need so much domain specific knowledge to move from one job to another. Let's focus on what the machines find difficult. It comes back to asking questions. Machines can't ask questions. We can. We need to foster more of that critical thinking. People will pay a premium for their human touch, as exhibited by our metaverse concierge. And a really important point here, jobs are only going away when problems go away, right? For as long as society has problems, there will be jobs, organizations, businesses there to help solve those problems. And just finally, for our children especially, I think in the longer term, let's spend less time worrying about skills and more time thinking about the sorts of problems that society is likely to have. So I'll give you a little example. A friend of mine, Helen, she was a barrister, of all things, far out of my possible intelligence, but she became very interested in space. And so now she's made a great career for herself, traveling the world, not so much now, as a commercial space lawyer. And she's helping create new precedent and helping organizations to understand how they can explore and, unfortunately, in some cases, exploit space. So there we go. I hope that that's been interesting. I'd love it if you want to ask me questions, or indeed if you want to connect with me. I'll just move my position a little bit. If you want to connect with me, please go ahead. Here are my contact details, and hope to see you in the workshop sessions later. Fenella, thank you.